and we immediately loop around the corner, and I'm ready to take this dude out. But as we get around the pillar, I can't believe what I'm looking at. So I'd always wanted to go hunting for deer, but I had never really had the chance to, because usually it's either super far or super expensive, and I didn't really have any other friends that were super interested in deer hunting, or at least as interested as I was in deer hunting. But if anybody would ever bring it up, I would try to hop on that opportunity. I would just want to see if they would let me tag along, because I knew how much time and equipment went into a successful deer hunt. And I also knew that it would take me years to accumulate all of the things that I needed. So just hopping onto somebody's trip and borrowing some of their gear would allow me the chance to actually see if I enjoy it. And I don't just enjoy the thought of it. Because it would really suck if I spent all of this time and money on going on a deer hunt, and when I got out there, I hated it. And about 2 years ago, the perfect situation unfolded to give me the opportunity to try it out. And this opportunity was relatively close to home for a fraction of the usual price. Me and my friend Sam were eating at this popular barbecue place in downtown Chicago on Green Street. And while we were just walking up to it, we bumped into one of Sam's friends from college. And honestly, it was super random because this friend doesn't even live here. This friend stays in Connecticut, and it was super weird because Sam usually doesn't stay in Chicago either, so he didn't even know Sam was here. It was one of those situations where two groups walk past each other, and one guy from each group does a hard double take. And then they both just stop, look at each other, and give each other a big hug. And we actually happened to be going to the same place for lunch. So we decided to have lunch together and enjoy some smoked meats. And of course, I just let Sam and his friend catch up for like 10 minutes because I could see how excited they were to see each other. They had been friends for a really long time, and they were clearly very comfortable with each other. And it was one of those situations where his friend's real personality came out immediately. And I could immediately tell that I like this guy. And if Sam vouches for him, he's most likely good people. So after giving them a little bit of time to catch up, I start to butt into the conversation. And I'm asking this guy what he does for work and things like that. And this guy actually mentions he is a hunting guy. And his full-time job is running a lodge that hosts deer hunting events. And my eyes light up immediately. I'm liking what I'm hearing. And I immediately start asking him follow-up questions and asking if it's possible for me and Sam to come up there and hunt. And Sam's friend, who happened to be named Chris, seemed so excited that I was asking him for me and Sam to join him. And he mentioned that he had been begging Sam for years to come out for a hunt for years at this point. And I looked at Sam a little bit confused because I knew that Sam knew that I had been wanting to do this. But he had never mentioned this friend that had been begging him to come join him on a hunt. But I could tell Sam's looking at me like he has something to tell me, but it's not so urgent that he has to tell me right now. And I could tell that he doesn't want me to make plans with this guy until we have a conversation while he's not here. But I still try to get as much information about this as I can from Chris. And he actually mentions that he has 2 spots open on a hunt only 2 weeks from now. And everything in me wanted to tell him right then and there that we wanted to take those 2 spots. But of course, I did not want to say yes until Sam and I had a chance to talk. And I try to buy a little bit of time because I could tell Chris would like to hear a yes right now. So I start asking him financial questions about how much it would all cost. And I'm telling him that I probably have to check my budget because 2 weeks is very short notice. And he immediately cuts me off by saying, "You're not paying $1. All you would have to pay for is your flight." And I try to combat this by saying I don't have any gear, so I still probably need some time to commit. And Chris cuts me off again and he says, "Well, all of us are about the same size. I have plenty of gear, and plus I have plenty of spare rifles. The only thing you guys would need to worry about is getting there." I want to say yes right now so bad, but I could still see that look on Sam's face that he isn't ready to fully commit. So I just playfully say, "Let's put a pin in this and I'll let you know by tomorrow." And Chris seemed pretty satisfied with this answer, so we just went back to regular conversation. We just had a really nice time, and then when we parted ways, obviously I asked Sam why he wasn't jumping on that opportunity. And Sam goes, "Listen, Chris is a really good guy, but I don't know if you want to stay at that house." And I give him a little confused look because he's almost saying it as if it's a warning. So I just playfully reply, "Well, go ahead then, tell me about the house." And then we let out a pretty good laugh because Sam realized how ominous he sounded. And then Sam just goes, "It's just weird there. I've been there a few times. And one time I was there for 2 weeks, and it's just weird." And I give him a look to go ahead and keep going because he's being unbearably vague. So he keeps going by saying, "Dude, it feels haunted there. And the woods surrounding it are very creepy. They're literally called the Dark Entry Woods. And the house itself is super old. It was built in the 1800s. I don't really know if you'd like it there." And I just simply reply, "Did you like it there?" And Sam goes, "Well, during the day, sure, but I kind of got used to it." Then he goes, "I'll go if you want to go, but I just wanted to let you know beforehand what to expect. I promise, dude, it's not a 5-star hotel." And to be honest, at the time, this almost made the whole trip seem even better. Because honestly, I like to go to places that have a little bit of character to them. And a hunting trip at a house from the 1800s in the Dark Entry Woods sounds like a good time to me. So I just tell Sam, "I'm cool with it, dude, let's go." And once I say I'm cool with it, Sam lightens up and we start looking up plane tickets. And just like that, 2 weeks later, we find ourselves in Northwest Connecticut. We had to get to this town called Cornwall. Then from there, we had to get onto some highway, and then we had to turn onto some road, and that road turned onto some weird desolate pathway. And this pathway went straight into the forest. And once we were on this small pathway, I started to realize why Sam was warning me. This was barely a road, and every turn we took, it got less suitable for motor vehicle. And then we finally pull up to this weird makeshift gate, and it just looks completely deserted. And I'm poking my head around trying to look past the gate to see if the road is even drivable after the gate. And I can't really tell, but I could see somebody walking up, and it's actually Chris. I was starting to feel like we might have been a little bit lost, so it was a relief seeing Chris. Because the comfort that you get from being with somebody that knows the area well is something I really needed in that moment. And Chris is just all smiles as he swings open the gate for us. And we just drive through the little gate, but then we wait for him to hop in with us as he closes the gate behind us. And he just hops in the back seat and we do our regular greetings. And then once the formalities are over, I ask Chris, yo, what's the deal with this place? It's a little bit creepy here. And Chris starts laughing so hard and says, dude, you have no idea. Do you even know where you are? And I just reply pretty jokingly, somewhere in Cornwall, Connecticut, hunting deer. And then both Sam and Chris give each other a look. Sam isn't smiling at all, but Chris has a mischievous smile on his face. And Chris looks back at me and he says, oh, we're not in Cornwall. You just entered Dudleytown. And I don't know if that's supposed to mean something to me, but Dudleytown has no significance in my brain. So I just sarcastically reply, I hope Dudleytown isn't as corny as Cornwall. And then Chris just slaps his thighs and says, well, I think it's time for a history lesson. And Sam whispers under his breath, here we go, as if he knew that this was about to be an annoyingly long-winded explanation. And Chris goes on to explain to me that Dudleytown is apparently a very well-known cursed town. And he explained to me that the curse originated from a group of brothers that apparently migrated from England. And the curse's origin was from one of their relatives trying to overthrow King Henry VIII. And he went on to explain that Dudleytown has an uncanny amount of random deaths and accidents. Apparently freak accidents occur consistently, and people report seeing spirits and entities in the forests almost every night. And then once he finishes explaining this, I get a wave of regret. But I try to play it off by joking that I'm ready to leave. You know, to play into his spooky, scary story to make him feel good about it. But then Chris continues and says, no, you should be honored to be here. So many people want to visit Dudleytown, but it's actually private property, and anybody that tries to trespass here is prosecuted. The only reason that we get to be here is because my grandfather bought an adjoining property, and being the good man he is, he left it to me. So right now we have access to the most haunted town in America. And I see why Sam was warning me now, because I could tell Chris really enjoys doing this bit with people, with all of the people that he invites here. He is a really good guy, but you could tell he's one of those guys that gets a kick out of spooking people and scaring them and seeing them being uncomfortable. And the way that he's telling this story is as if we're entering a very dangerous place. But after every sentence, he's laughing and hitting my shoulder as if he's really enjoying scaring me. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, we pull up to where we're staying. And when I tell you this was the most unique looking house, I mean it. Because it wasn't a house, it was more like a tower. I was expecting some type of cabin, but this thing was shaped like a Pringles can. It was a massive cylinder building made of large bricks. It was kind of reminiscent of a lighthouse or like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and it was multiple stories high. The top of it was probably higher than the tree line, and I could see that there's at least 5 stories based on the windows. So we pull up to this thing and it doesn't really have a yard around it. There's just about a 20-foot gap between the structure and the tree line, 360 degrees around it, and the road that we were on just ends as we hit this small clearing. Then we just park next to this weird house tower thing. And this house is really big as well. It looks so out of place out here, but it's built really well. It wasn't a dingy and broken down structure. It looks sturdy, warm, well crafted, and well lit. And to be honest, it was very impressive. But considering what I just heard about this town and these woods from Chris, the house was already giving me bad vibes. And we just hop out, grab our luggage out of the car, and bring it inside. And once we get inside, I realized that I've never been in a place like that. It really was an 1800s style house. And I'm looking around this place amazed how different it is from any other place that I've ever seen. And Chris sees how amazed I am, so he takes that opportunity to explain a little bit to me about the house. And he points at the center of the room and he says, you see that pillar right in the middle of the room? That's the furnace. It goes through every floor and heats the entire house from the center. So if you ever get cold, just go closer to the pillar. And if you ever want to go up or downstairs, all of the staircases spiral around that furnace in the middle. The stairs and the pillar and the furnace were cool, but what really caught my eye about this place was all of the random memorabilia, relics, souvenirs, you name it. And Chris sees that I'm admiring that stuff more than I'm admiring the pillar. So he goes on to explain that his grandfather was a World War II traveling journalist, and he spent the entire war traveling the world reporting on the worst atrocities. And the entire time he was sending back memorabilia from every place that he visited. And even after the war, he continued his work as a traveling journalist. And everything that we see here and everything that we see in this house is an accumulation of over 40 years of travel journalism. Now that's something that got my attention. This place was like a museum. Every inch of every wall was covered in incredibly interesting things. Every table was organized with items and their explanation of origin. There must have been thousands of pieces in here and I couldn't get enough of it. So I'm talking Chris's ear off about this stuff, and after about 5 minutes of asking about random items, Chris says, "This isn't even the good stuff." And naturally I reply, "Well, show me the good stuff." And then he goes, "Well, that's on the top floor." And I go, "Well, what are we still doing here then?" We start laughing, and then he leads the way up the spiral staircase around the pillar. And the second floor is kind of like a lounge living room. And the third and fourth floor are clearly bedrooms and living quarters. But then the fifth floor was like something I've never seen. It was a full 360 of windows looking over the surrounding woods. And there was only one section that wasn't a window. And in the window's place was a large, beautiful cabinet. And I'm not really sure what else to call it other than a cabinet. It almost looked like one of those pieces that really rich people keep their china in. It has a wooden base but glass doors so you could see inside. And there's just 2 doors that open up into like a large shelving area. And you could tell right away that this stuff was the good stuff, just because of the way it's displayed and stored. And these were clearly his grandfather's prized possessions. These were what he believed were his most unique and valuable items from his travels. There was a good amount of items in there, but it seemed like 5 or 6 were meant to be the center of display. And Chris just goes ahead and starts giving me a tour of the cabinet. And he starts with this weird knit white mask. And he says, "My grandfather got this from Finland from the most deadly sniper at the time. The man's name was Simo Haya, aka the White Death. And he's reported to have 505 confirmed kills." To be honest, the mask was super freaky. It just had these weird slits for the eyes. And the thought that it was worn by somebody who has over 500 confirmed kills makes it scarier than a Michael Myers movie. Apparently, Simo Haya put up horror movie numbers. And as I'm trying to wrap my mind about what he just told me about this mask, he moves on to the next item. He points at this old beat up camera on the middle of the display and he just says, "Do you know what's on that camera roll?" And of course, I shake my head no, but I could only imagine that he's about to tell me something horrific. On that camera is the last remaining evidence of the Nanking Massacre. And I go, "What do you mean the last remaining evidence?" And then I follow up by saying, "And what do you mean the Nanking Massacre? I don't even know what that is." And Chris cuts me off and says, "Exactly, you don't even know what the Nanking Massacre is. Because the Japanese destroyed almost all of the evidence of it. But this camera contains almost all of the evidence of all of the atrocities that happened in those horrible 6 weeks." And I wanted to ask, why didn't they ever develop the camera footage? But I guess having a camera that apparently contains something that you can't see sounds a little bit cooler. And before I even got the chance to ask my follow-up question, Chris was cutting me off pointing at the next item. And it was this large syringe-looking torture tool. And he didn't even have to start explaining to me for me to know what that thing was used for. But naturally, Chris explained it anyway. And he just goes on and says, "This right here is from an island off the coast of Italy, where they were performing unethical human experiments. They were performing them on the mentally ill and the POWs. This thing right here was used for almost half a decade on countless lobotomies." At this point, the weight of the history of these items is kind of starting to overwhelm me, but he doesn't stop. And he points to a vial of water that's being held up by a small metal display. And he says, "Hey, you see that water? That right there was taken from the underground lakes of Paris that you can only access through the catacombs under Paris. My grandfather convinced a group of cataphiles to take him down into the restricted areas of the catacombs. He said the cataphiles would perform rituals and sacrifices in those waters, in those underground lakes, in the catacombs." Then Chris went on to a tangent explaining how there's miles of underground tunnels under Paris. And apparently there's a group of about 100 cataphiles that are obsessed with mapping the tunnels under Paris. If you don't know what a cataphile is, it's just somebody who has an obsession with the catacombs. But apparently, according to Chris, there's a network of people to this day who have access to all of these tunnels under Paris. And nobody really knows the exact use for them. You could only imagine that secret tunnels probably aren't used for something good. And at this point, I'm overloaded with information, so I just put my hands up to signal to Chris for him to slow down or stop. He sees that I've kind of had enough of this, but he pleads to me to let him show me one more. And I just jokingly say, "All right, fine, I could handle one more." And he just points at a raggedy old doll, and he just says, "That is from the Island of the Dolls. It's an entire island in Mexico covered in little dolls just like this. They're all over the trees and the houses, hanging from the ceilings everywhere. The man that lived there kept putting these dolls up to ward off the spirit of a little girl. He said that that little girl was relentlessly haunting him and his family. And this is one of those dolls. And that's it for me. That was enough for the day. I have had enough of these spooky woods, this creepy house tower, and all of this very heavy memorabilia. Guys, super quick, if you haven't subscribed to the channel or hit the notification bell, please do so. I see that over 90% of you that watch the videos aren't subscribed, so it'd mean the world to me if you did subscribe. And of course, hit the like button and let me know in the comment section what you want to see me do next. Enjoy the show. And thankfully, finally, right when I'm finished with this super heavy conversation, Chris's phone rings and he goes, "Oh, this is the other couple that's coming with us. Just give me a second, I have to go open the gate for them." And Chris immediately runs down the spiral staircase and runs out the door towards the gate. And finally, me and Sam have a moment alone. And I look at Sam and I go, "Dude, you really downplayed how freaky this place was." And Sam goes, "I don't know what to tell you. I told you you wouldn't like it here." And we were just being playful and joking because obviously I did still want to be here. It was just more intense than I was initially expecting. And we go ahead and take a look out the window and we see Chris jog out towards the path towards the gate. So Sam and I just decide to go down the stairs and greet everybody on the first floor when they arrive. But I'm not really fully satisfied with Sam's answer, and I need to dig a little bit more about this place. So I just straight up ask him, "Is there anything that I should know before he gets back?" And Sam goes and scratches his head and raises his eyebrow, as if there's so much more that I need to know. And he takes a big deep breath and then he just starts. And he goes, "Well, definitely don't look down the crawl space on the second floor. It's super creepy in there. And don't forget to be respectful to the wardrobe in your bedroom because it's actually a Dybbuk." And I could tell that he can see in my face that I have no idea what a Dybbuk is, so he gives me a brief explanation. And he goes, "A Dybbuk is a malevolent spirit that will possess you if you disrespect the item that it has latched to. So just don't forget to be nice to your wardrobe." I can't even tell if he's joking because he's saying it so dry and blunt. And he keeps going. Chris's grandfather bought this house from a family of pagans. And it's rumored that the family that he bought it from was heavily involved in pagan witchcraft. And I could tell that Sam is just looking around the room trying to gather old memories about how terrifying this place really is. So I break the silence and I just say, "Please tell me that's everything." And Sam goes, "Well, that's everything other than the cellar. Definitely don't go in the cellar. But there is plenty that I could tell you about the woods." And I just think to myself, okay, no cellar, doesn't really matter because you couldn't pay me to go down there anyway. But now apparently there's more about these woods, so go ahead, let's hear it. And Sam goes, "I avoid looking into the tree line at night because of how often you see things. They just look like hazy figures right inside the tree line. But if you look into them, you'll see constant movement. So I just try to avoid it altogether. But once you're past the tree line and into the woods, it's usually pretty fine." And I immediately cut him off and say, "What do you mean pretty fine?" And Sam shrugs his shoulders like he's sorry that he has to tell me this information. And he says, "Usually there's really good hunting, but it's not uncommon to find a lost person in there. We found one time in there and the woman could barely talk and she didn't even know how she got there." And I'm just nodding my head, coming to terms with the fact that I'm staying in a haunted house, in a haunted forest with a bunch of strangers other than Sam. And right as I'm thinking about how anxious I am to meet these strangers, I hear a knock at the door. And when I heard the first knock, I immediately thought that it must be Chris and the others knocking for us to open the door. And I just assumed that their hands are probably full with their supplies. But the knock was really weird. It was just 3 slow rhythmic knocks. And there was just a split second too long in between the knocks. And me and Sam just look at each other with very questionable looks on our face. But both of us walk up to the door simultaneously because neither of us want to do it alone. And we pop the door open and I immediately get a huge wave of relief because it's just this little puny, tiny little woman. And I only use 3 adjectives to say that because she couldn't have been over 4'10". And I wasn't relieved by her puny size. I was relieved by her demeanor. She was puny, little, tiny, and happy. And she just barges right in the front door and starts asking us questions. And the first thing she asks is, "Are you guys here for the hunt too? And where's Chris?" She was honestly really friendly and nice, but the last question that she asked threw me off a little bit, because I thought Chris had left the house to let her into the gate. But this lady's acting as if she hasn't seen Chris yet. So I go to peek out of the door and I see another car pull up with Chris and the other couple in it. So now I'm looking back at this girl wondering, where did she come from? Because I don't see any other car in the clearing. And I shoot Sam the look that I need to tell you something. But he's busy talking to the new girl, so I just turn my attention back towards Chris and the other couple that's arriving right now. And I'm just standing in this doorway watching this couple, while Chris is helping them unpack their car. And I'm not really sure what the upcoming interaction is going to be like, because I can only assume that Chris is going to ask her the question that I'm thinking. But I'm just letting it unfold because I don't think it's my place to question this girl, or even report things back to Chris that I find weird. So I just go ahead and let the situation unfold. And the couple that arrive with Chris seem really excited and nice. And they introduced themselves to me in that manner, really excited and really nice. The girlfriend's name was Kat, and the boyfriend's name was Austin. And to be honest, they didn't really seem like your usual hunting types. They seemed a little bit ditzy and kind of unbothered, but who am I to judge? Because I definitely didn't come off as a hunting type. And their energy just feels great, so I'm excited that we got matched up with them for this hunt. But just as I suspected, I see that Chris is a little bit confused when he sees that there's somebody else on the first floor with us. And then I see it go through his face that he's connecting the dots about who this is. And he looks at the new girl and says, "Oh, you must be Maria." And the woman that had arrived before them cheerfully introduces herself to Chris and confirms that she is in fact Maria. But Chris went ahead and asked the follow-up question that I was expecting him to ask. "Maria, if you don't mind me asking, how did you get here?" And Maria replies, "I just got dropped off right before the pathway, so I just walked in." Chris is looking at her a little bit concerned and confused, and follows up by saying, "Well, can you make sure when the hunt is over and it's time to leave, you ask me to escort you out? Because this is technically private property, and you really shouldn't be walking through it without me." I'm not really sure why Chris is so worried about the private property situation, because to me it's a bit weird that she got dropped off and she had walked down that eerie pathway by herself, and she was actually able to find this place alone. Not to mention the only thing that she has with her is a backpack. But again, who am I to judge? It might have just been her only way of getting here, and she just really wanted to come on this trip. Once everybody's inside and settled in, we're all just having a pretty good time getting to know each other, and we're all just chatting it up about the upcoming hunt tomorrow. And apparently Kat and Austin do off-the-grid living, and they try to go hunting once a year to fill up their freezer with meat. And if they don't get anything, they just buy half cows at a time. I thought this was really cool, so I'm just talking their ears off about questions about how do you actually do off-the-grid living. And at the same time, Sam and Chris were just continuing to catch up. And even though I was really enjoying this conversation with Kat and Austin, for some reason out of the corner of my eye, I just couldn't stop checking on Maria. She wasn't exactly doing anything wrong. In fact, she was doing exactly what I was doing when I first got here. She was just walking around the room, checking out all the memorabilia, but she wasn't asking any questions about it. It almost looked like she was looking for something to me, but I was only able to grab small glances at her. But then after a couple minutes, Kat and Austin got up and went to their room to put their phones on the charger. And I finally got a moment to actually watch Maria undisturbed. And I'm just watching her skim all over all those items. And from the side of her face, it looked like she was getting visibly upset. And don't get me wrong, I could understand reading the descriptions to some of those items and getting a little bit emotional. But this lady looked angry. I'm seeing this anger grow on this girl's face, and then almost instantaneously it disappears. And just like that, it goes back to bubbly smiles when Chris calls over to her asking if she's hungry. And she just looks up at him with a nice, sweet, innocent smile, telling him that she'd love to eat. And at the same time, Kat and Austin emerged from the staircase announcing that they would love to eat as well. And I just raised my hand and I let him know that I too would love to eat. And Chris goes, "Oh, okay, everybody's eating. Sam, do you mind giving me a hand? Because we got some hungry mouths to feed." And of course, Sam obliges, and those two just kind of lock into cooking. And Kat and Austin try to break the ice with Maria by going up to her and asking her what she's looking at. And I could tell that Kat is trying to get Maria involved in the conversation to be nice, because she's the only person here alone. I have Sam, she has Austin. Not to mention, we realize pretty quickly that English is probably Maria's second language. She clearly spoke Spanish primarily. So it was super nice of Kat to put the effort in to try to build a connection with Maria, and put that much effort in trying to bring her into the dialogue of the group. But the conversation was very interesting, so I decided to join them, because I was very curious about what was making Maria so visibly upset just a couple moments ago. And Kat just kind of opens the dialogue by just saying, "All this stuff is pretty cool, huh?" And then Maria says something that's a little bit odd. And Maria goes, "This guy stole a lot, huh?" And then she just kind of gestures to all the memorabilia that Chris's grandfather had collected. And Kat and Austin laugh because they're under the impression that either Maria was trying to make a joke or she was mistranslating what she was trying to say. But I get the feeling that Maria meant what she just said. But Kat jokingly replies before I even get the chance to. And she just says, "He did collect a lot of stuff, didn't he?" And Maria looks around the room as if she's a little disappointed, and she just says, "Is this everything?" So I take this opportunity to butt in with the same joke that Chris said to me to make Maria feel welcome. And I say, "Oh, Maria, this isn't even the good stuff." And then Maria turns her attention towards me and she just says, "Show me," which came off as very direct, but she didn't really say it in a mean tone. So it was actually kind of funny. And Kat and Austin both hopped on the joke and they both just looked at me and said, "Yeah, show me." So I just go, "All right, time to go to the top floor." And as we're heading upstairs, I just shout to Chris and Sam, "Yo, I'm gonna go show them the cabinet of curiosities that you guys got upstairs." And Chris shouts back, "Hey, make sure you give them all the details," because he was too busy cooking to do the spooky guy routine with them right now. So we walk back up these 4 flights of stairs back into this large showroom. And right away, I'm a little bit confused because it's completely dark up there. Because the first floor doesn't have many windows, so I didn't even realize how dark it got. I'm looking out the windows and it looks like it's nighttime, so I have to peek at my phone to make sure that I didn't have a random blackout for 4 hours. And my phone is telling me exactly what I thought it was going to tell me. It's only 2 p.m. and it's completely dark out. So I immediately start brushing the walls with my hands looking for the light switch. And I openly ask the group, "Yo guys, since when does it get dark at 2 p.m.? And Austin replies, "Brother, we're in the dark entry woods. It's dark from 1 p.m. to 5 a.m. in November." I knew it got dark early in Connecticut, especially in the winter, but 1 p.m. is crazy. And I could also see that it had just started to snow. So that's just gonna make this hunt a little bit more difficult. So when I finally come across the lights and I get to switch them on, I look over to Kat and Austin and I notice that Maria isn't standing. So I look around the room towards the cabinet and I notice Maria is already standing in front of it and she already has it open. And I'm just looking at her and I'm starting to get more and more suspicious of her because I hadn't even told her that that's where the other stuff was. But there she was, tracking it down in a pitch black room, already standing in front of it by the time I turned the lights on. And I see her reaching into the cabinet. I could tell that she picked something up, but I can't make out what it is. And I'm almost positive that we also aren't supposed to pick things up. Chris didn't flat out say that, but I would just assume that the prized possessions of his grandfather that are stored in a private cabinet on the 5th floor probably shouldn't be touched, at least without asking. So I start walking towards the left side of her, and I'm just trying to get a glimpse of what she has in her hands. And Kat and Austin go around the right side of her, but in a much more excited, bubbly manner. They're just trying to get their eyes on the special memorabilia. And as I'm coming around on the left side of her, I see that Maria picked up the Dudleytown, and she's holding it with both hands with the sharp syringe pointing towards her right. And I could see her face only slightly from the side, but she's not looking down at the Dudleytown. She's looking up at the mirror that lines the back of the cabin. And as Kat approaches her from her right, asking her happily what she's looking at, Maria does a swinging motion to the right as if she was going to present the Dudleytown to Kat and Austin. But she did it at the exact moment that Kat ran up right next to her, and she got Kat right in the arm with it. She pricked her right above her bicep, and it was one of those moments where everybody was lost for words. Because this Dudleytown was sharp, and it really got Kat. She was bleeding almost immediately all the way down her arm, and it looked like it was at least a half-inch gash. And for a moment, we're just standing there all looking at each other in complete shock. Almost like a couple kids that did something wrong in class waiting for the teacher to catch them. And me and Austin immediately start applying pressure to the wound and covering because this thing's leaking. And we get it under control almost immediately, but Austin's freaking out a little bit. And he's telling Kat that he wants to yell down to Chris. But Kat is trying to calm Austin down even though she's the one with the stab wound. And as I'm watching them have an argument about not wanting to make a scene, primarily to not make Maria feel more uncomfortable, and Austin arguing back to her that they have no idea how many diseases could possibly be on that Dudleytown, I go ahead and take a peek back at Maria. And this girl is holding the Dudleytown with her chin tucked as if she's praying to it. But I could barely hear what she's mumbling over Kat and Austin arguing. But it sounds like she's reciting something very quickly in Spanish under her breath. And I just keep staring at her, watching her do this before she quickly places it back down into the place that she found it. And then right after she puts it down, she immediately goes up to Kat, profusely apologizing. And Kat is trying to be nice, letting her know that she doesn't think it's her fault and that she has nothing to worry about. But still, Austin is not being as loving. And he just keeps saying, "We need a first aid kit." And Kat looks at Austin very seriously and just says, "Fine, but just don't make a big deal out of it." And Austin claps back at her right away and says, "Don't make a big deal out of it? You have no idea what kind of diseases could be on that thing." And after that realization sinks in, she agrees that we should probably go talk to Chris. But she demands that we do it calmly and we don't blame anyone. So we all just slowly go down the spiral staircase like a couple kids in trouble. And we just go ahead and let Kat talk. And she just really lightly says, Chris, do you have a first aid kit? I got a boo-boo. She's clearly trying to play it down, but once Sam and Chris look up and they see her blood-soaked arm, they immediately demand to know what happened. And Austin can't help himself but to throw Maria under the bus. And Austin just goes, Maria accidentally stabbed her with that torture device that you have upstairs in that cabinet. And Kat immediately cuts him off, defending Maria. She says she didn't mean to do it really was an accident. But Austin talks over Kat again and says, Chris, do you think she's going to catch a disease from that thing? Do we need to take her to the hospital right now? And Chris is looking at Maria like all he wants to say is, why are you touching my things? But he has to answer Austin. And Chris reassures Austin by saying, no, we got that thing professionally sanitized. Just go ahead and throw some peroxide on it and you'll be fine. So we all just go ahead and spend the next 20 minutes bandaging up Kat. And we're all just trying to make sure she's fine. But the entire time, the only thing that I want to do, the only thing I could think about is telling Sam about what I saw Maria doing after she stabbed Kat. And I'm shooting him looks from across the table like, hey bud, I got something to tell you. But instead of being able to have a private conversation, we're forced to sit through the most awkward dinner of our lives. Because for one, none of us really know each other. Two, the host is pissed because somebody was touching his private items. And we all feel like we're in trouble because of it. And three, one of the strangers stabbed one of the other strangers with an Italian torture device. And Kat, wound victim, was the only one that was trying to revive the mood. And I could tell that Kat did feel really bad for Maria. She just didn't want Maria to feel like she was ruining everybody's time. But I don't feel the same way. I almost want to tell Kat that I have a suspicion that she did that on purpose. Because from my perspective, it was almost like she timed turning around to make it seem like it was an accident. And she didn't immediately start attending to Kat. She took the time to mumble something under her breath for at least 30 seconds before she even acknowledged that Kat was hurt. And I'm just looking at Maria, waiting for her to say something during this dinner. But she's just sitting there quietly looking down, moving stuff around on her plate, clearly just waiting for the dinner to end. And I was doing the same thing. I wanted this dinner to end so bad that I actually decided to excuse myself. I just scarfed down my food as quickly as I could, and I half-jokingly announced to the table that we all need to get up at 4 a.m. and I need to get my 8 hours. But it didn't really make sense because we probably didn't need to go to sleep for at least 3 hours. But clearly everybody was okay with the idea of going back to our own quarters. We were all okay with getting out of this uncomfortable situation. So everybody just clears their plates quietly and helps Chris tidy up before heading upstairs. And when me and Sam finally get to our room, I close the door behind me, and right as I'm about to spill the beans about my suspicions of Maria, Sam just goes, I don't trust that girl one bit. And I just reply, right? Dude, she stabbed Kat. And Sam's looking at me a little confused and he goes, hold on, wait, you're telling me that she did this on purpose? Why would you guys come down and tell us it was an accident? And I fill Sam in with my suspicions by saying, Kat and Austin thought it was an accident, but I think I saw her time it to make it look like it was an accident. And I just see Sam give me a little eye roll and gesture something along the lines of, that seems a bit outlandish, are you sure? And I back up with my statement and I say, bro, she was looking in the mirror and she spun with the pointy end straight towards her. And then this girl spent a half minute whispering in Spanish, speaking to the Lusitano before she even started helping. And Sam goes, what do you mean she was whispering to it? And I say, bro, I don't know. She was just holding it with two hands, talking to it in Spanish. And Sam goes, don't you think it was a bit weird that she walked here? And I just say, did you bring that up to Chris? And Sam just goes, Chris said that she just contacted him through his website. And she went ahead and paid the invoice immediately. And he wasn't just going to turn her away for not showing up with a vehicle. And he didn't really seem to be suspicious of her. He was definitely annoyed that she was touching his grandfather's things. But I'm sure he's met much weirder characters here. And we just keep talking it over for a little bit, but eventually we get bored of the subject. And we're just relaxing in our room trying to wind down. We're just trying to get drowsy and get some sleep because we have a big day ahead of us. And I'm just laying on my bed starting to doze off, but then I hear footsteps coming from above us. And I just initially assume that it's probably Chris up on the 5th floor making sure that none of his grandfather's stuff is broken. But then I hear those footsteps come down the stairs and stop right in front of our door. And I'm waiting almost 10 seconds, anticipating a knock, and finally it happens. And it was those same 3 weird rhythmic knocks. And me and Sam look at each other with disgust because we cannot believe that this girl's back at our door right now. And obviously, we're not opening this door alone because she just stabbed Kat. So we both just get up just in case she's wielding the Lusitano. And we pull the door open and both take a big step back. And I immediately feel so bad that we were acting disgusted with her presence just a couple seconds ago, because Maria has the saddest look on her face. And she's holding 2 big cups of liquid that's steaming and smells like cinnamon. And she just says really lightly, "Chris helped me make this as an apology to all you guys. It's called a Atole. It's sweet with cane sugar and it's really warm. Please have it." Me and Sam both just grab the cup from her and the Atole smells delicious. And we both immediately take a sip of it and it tastes as delicious as it smells. And as we're both visibly showing how much we're enjoying the drink, Maria's just turning around to go back down the stairs. And she just goes, "I hope you guys really enjoy it. I make that every year on the Day of the Dead." And Sam just instinctually answers, "Oh, what day is the Day of the Dead? I've only heard about it." And Maria just says, "It's tonight, didn't you guys know?" And she's just saying that as she's walking down the stairs giggling. And we just close the door and look at each other. And Sam looks at me so dry and says, "No, Maria, I didn't know. That's why I asked." And I just reply sarcastically and I say, "She's lucky this Atole smacks because I'd vote her off the island today." And me and Sam just start laughing and we finish up that smooth, sweet, creamy Atole before laying down. And I managed to ignore the creepiness of the room before I dozed off. But I wasn't really having a comfortable deep night's sleep. I felt like I was rolling around and half dreaming for hours. I finally abruptly woke up in a deep sweat, but I couldn't really tell what woke me up. So I'm just looking around this room and I'm getting a really bad feeling. And I look over at Sam and he's not awake yet, but he sure is rolling around. And then I start to hear something that's really faint and it almost sounds like marching and chants. And I hear it getting a little bit louder and I look back over at Sam and now he's awake and sitting up. And he looks over at me and he's surprised to see me awake because I could tell that he doesn't know what woke him up either. But then we both start to hear it again and we're just sitting trying to listen to it as quietly as we can so we can make out what that sound is. And after about 20 seconds of intently listening, we could tell that it's definitely coming from outside. So me and Sam both quietly get up and we inch towards the closest window. And we go to the one that we think is in the direction of the sound that we're hearing. And we look out the window and it's coming from the same direction of the path that we came from. And I could see multiple lights in the distance getting closer and closer to us. But we still can't make out what it is, so we're just standing there waiting for what feels like an eternity. Until finally a group of 8 people emerge from the pathway, and they're just marching at a steady pace right towards the house. And these guys are holding torches, wearing hooded cloaks. And I start freaking out because 8 people is not a small group of people. 8 people holding torches, wearing identical cloaks in the middle of the night, in the woods, is bad news 100% of the time. And they're walking straight towards the house, but they don't look like they're walking super aggressively. So we don't immediately run downstairs to get the rifles. We just stay up there peeking out the window and we just continue to watch them. And instead of coming directly towards the front door of the house, they take a slight turn, and for just a second, I think that they're just gonna walk around the house and just keep it moving into the woods. But they stop at these 2 protruding doors that must be Chris's cellar. The cellar isn't like the basement of the house. The doors are about 10 feet away from the structure, but I'm not really sure if the cellar connects to the main house underground. So when we watch these guys open the doors to the cellar and go downstairs, just walking down there in a single file line, and when they close the doors behind them, the first thing that comes to my mind is to ask Sam, can they get into the house from there? And Sam's looking at me dead serious and he goes, I don't know if the cellar connects to the house, but we need to go get Chris right now. So we immediately start hustling through the house down to where Chris stays. And Sam is taking that time to tell me what he thinks is the best game plan for that situation. And the plan is very simple. Barricade the first floor windows and doors, and bring all of the rifles to the 5th floor so we have the higher ground. And we get to Chris's room, but we try to wake him up quietly because we're not trying to wake up the whole house without confirming with Chris that those guys aren't supposed to be there. Because if he knows that they go down there, then we don't want to just pile on to the events of the night. And if they're not supposed to be there, we want to calmly wake everybody up so they don't make any loud noises to alert those people that we're in here. So we're just gently knocking on Chris's door, whispering his name. And we're just whispering that we need to talk to him about something. And we finally could faintly hear him roll out of his bed. And he just groggily opens his door a little crack and immediately says, guys, the house makes weird noises. I promise you it's nothing. as if he's so used to people knocking on his door in the middle of the night in his creepy ass house. And Sam gets very serious very quickly, and he makes sure that Chris is looking in his face when he says, "Chris, I need you awake right now. We just watched 8 men enter your cellar. Can they access the house from there?" And Chris immediately shakes off his grogginess and he just goes, "What do you mean there's 8 men in my cellar?" And right as I'm about to reply, we hear screaming from upstairs. And it sounds like somebody is being violently tortured. It sounds like somebody's screaming for their life. So me, Sam, and Chris immediately grab 3 rifles and go right upstairs. And in my head, I don't understand how these guys managed to get into the house. Because as we passed the 2nd floor where Maria was staying, the screams were clearly coming from above us, from the 3rd floor, which would be impossible to enter without entering the house first. And since it's coming from the 3rd floor, it must be Kat. So at least Austin is in there buying us time to get to this room. And we finally get to the 3rd floor door, but it's locked. And Chris doesn't hesitate to start breaking the door down, because it sounds like Kat is honestly screaming from her life from the other side of this door. And I start to hear Austin's voice a little bit, but I just barely hear him say, "Kat, what's going on? What's wrong?" When Chris finally breaks down the door, I get a look in, and like I said before, these rooms are just large 360 rooms, and they just have that pillar and the staircase in the middle. So when we first get into this door, they're actually on the opposite side of this pillar. So we have to loop around this room to get to them. But right when the door gets broken down, I could see a mirror a little bit in front of me and to the right, and it's showing me the reflection of where Kat and Austin are. And in that mirror, I see 3 people. I see Kat laying on her back screaming, and Austin just sitting up on the bed next to her. But in the same room, there's a man standing over Kat. But there's a man standing over Kat with a lab coat on, and it looks like he's inserting the lucitome from upstairs into Kat's eye. And she's just convulsing and shrieking for help. And we immediately loop around the corner, and I'm ready to take this dude out. But as we get around the pillar, I can't believe what I'm looking at. Austin and Kat are in the exact same position, and Kat is still freaking out and screaming, but there's nobody else in the room. And I whip my head around to look back into the mirror, but there's nobody else in the mirror but us. And when I turn back around to look at Kat and Austin, Kat seems to be out of whatever excruciating pain she was in. And now she was just hysterically crying. And she's just trying to get it out, trying to explain what happened to her. And she's just saying things like, "He was right there, the man was right there. Babe, he was putting that thing in my eye." And that freaks me out because she's explaining what I saw in that mirror for a brief second. And we're all just huddled around her trying to console her. But me and Sam both know that there's also 8 men outside in the cellar like 5 minutes ago. And this isn't the only threat that we're dealing with. But Kat is completely unconsolable. She's hyperventilating and sobbing, and she's trying to convince us of what was just happening to her. But then out of nowhere, she stops talking and she turns her attention to something behind us. And the whole room lights up with a flash out of nowhere. All of us kind of jump and immediately turn around to see what that was. And all 3 of us immediately raise our rifles to the source of the light. But we're a little bit confused about what we're looking at. It's a small person holding up a camera to their face, taking a picture of us with the flash on. And when they take the camera down from their face, I realize that they have a mask on. And it's an all-white mask with 2 little slits at the eyes. And I think at that exact moment, we all realized who and what we were looking at. That's little old Maria wearing Simo Haya's mask, and she's snapping a picture of us with the camera from Nanking. And in the opposite hand, she's holding the doll from Mexico by one of its arms. And Chris is the first to speak up, and he just goes, "Maria, what are you doing?" And Maria replies in a venomous tone, "Venganza," before running out of the room and down the stairs. And we're just standing there in complete shock, like, what just happened? She ran away like we were supposed to chase her, but we just stood there because obviously we need to make sure that Kat was okay. And as we're trying to console her, Austin just starts flipping out. And he just starts yelling at us, "Just get away from her. Please just don't come anywhere near us. Your whole spooky, weird haunted house bit is getting old. We're not interested in whatever weird haunted house act that you want to play out." And he's talking directly at Chris. He must be under the assumption that all of this is some kind of hoax. And he obviously assumes that this is orchestrated by Chris, because Chris does lean into the spooky allure of his house and these woods. But Austin is just completely done with it, and he just starts packing all of his stuff back into his suitcase. and he forces Kat to get dressed before barging out of the room and down the stairs. And we have no choice but to just kind of follow them down the stairs because that's where Maria went too. And me and Sam both know that there's at least 8 men still outside in the cellar. But Austin's not hearing any of it, and he just completely ignores all of our warnings and barges right out of the front door. Him and Kat just head straight towards their car, and Sam just closes the door behind them and locks it. And we hear Austin's car turn on, and we just hear them speed down that pathway. They just got up and left, and I do not blame them. Me, Sam, and Chris take a moment to talk about our next move before Sam says, "Listen guys, we just need to barricade the house and we'll be just fine." And me and Chris just both nod, kind of liking that idea. But then I see something come into Chris's thoughts, and he just goes, "Hold on a minute," and then he just runs up the stairs. And we just instinctively follow him all the way up to the 5th floor. And he just goes right up to the cabinet and frantically opens it. I thought that he must have noticed what Maria was wearing and holding, but I guess he didn't really put it together until right now, because he started freaking out once he noticed that most of his grandfather's prized possessions were gone. The mask, the camera, the lucitome, and the doll. All gone. I'm scanning the shelves, and the first thing that comes into my head is, well, at least she left the water from the catacombs in Paris. But I lean in to take a closer look at it because it's kind of dark in here and hard to see. And I realized the vial was completely empty. And my stomach drops at the thought of where she might have put that water. And I realized that maybe her peace offering was not so sweet. And I realized that I had heard her walk past our room, go to the 5th floor, and then come back downstairs before serving us our atole. I wanted to throw up at this point at the thought of drinking ritual sacrifice water from the underground lakes of Paris. But I could tell Chris is very angry, and he just starts pacing. And he's just mumbling to himself. She thinks that she could steal from me? It's almost like he was trying to hype himself up to go hunt her down. I've been looking at Chris this whole time, and I didn't really notice that Sam had wandered off a bit to go look out the window. And when I saw him, I assumed that he was checking in on the location of the hooded men. But when he noticed that I was looking at him, he just said, "She's just out there waiting for us." And when Chris heard that, he just marched straight up to the window to get his eyes on her. He doesn't even seem slightly intimidated, but when I see her, it's like something out of a nightmare. This little lady is just standing right at the edge of the tree line, and she's still wearing that freaky white mask. And she's looking right up at us, as if she's waiting for us. And she's only about 20 feet away from the entrance of the cellar, like she doesn't have a care in the world that there's people in there too. It was like she was having a stare down with Chris, and she just held up her 2 hands towards him. And she's just holding the camera and the doll as if she's mocking him. And just like that, she turns around and runs straight into the woods. Chris doesn't even hesitate to turn around and start running down the stairs. But the entire way down the stairs now to the house, Sam is pleading to him to be smart about this, because we still need to worry about those men that we saw go into the cellar. Our obvious best tactical option is to stay in this fortified structure with all of our weapons. But Chris has worked himself up to a point of no return, and he's just shouting at Sam that he could stay here if he wants, and that he'll go alone if he has to. We get to the 1st floor, and as Chris is frantically undoing all of the locks, Sam gets a moment to look back at me, and he just says, "Doug, I can't let him go alone." And that's all I needed to hear, because there's no way I'm staying in this house by myself, especially after seeing everything that I've seen tonight. I only had a split second to think about it, but the thought of being in the woods with 2 other guys, and we all have rifles, and we're only chasing 1 girl, sounded way better than being in this freaky house by myself with 8 men right outside in the cellar. So once Chris gets the door open, I just follow them right out of it. So we just start running towards the direction where Maria just entered the woods. And we're sprinting for a second, but we all start to slow down as we're getting close to those cellar doors, because we could hear a clear chanting coming from down there. And there's clearly some sort of light peeking through the seams of the doors. And we all just kind of shoot looks at each other like, what are we gonna do about this? I'm the first one to speak up, and I just say, "Chris, I know you're upset, but we can't just leave your house unguarded here." And Chris is just showing a lot of frustration on his face because he's really not sure what to do. But then I look back at Sam, and he's already sneaking up to these cellar doors. And I start panicking because I think he's gonna whip them open and start confronting these guys, as if there wasn't enough going on already. Like now we need a confrontation with whoever is chanting in this cellar. But then I realize what Sam is actually doing. I see that there's a spare 2x4 leaning up against these protruding cellar doors, and Sam just gently grabs it and slides it through the 2 handles of the cellar doors. completely locking these guys in. And he didn't even really make any sound doing it. So they don't even know that they're locked in yet. And we all just kind of shoot looks at each other that are saying, well, that kind of works for me. 1 down, 1 to go. And we just go ahead and take off running into the woods. And I could see that Chris is still furious at this point. And he's just yelling at the top of his lungs out here. He's just going, Maria, Maria, get back here. I'm going to find you. And he just seems to be consumed with rage. And that's kind of an issue because we're kind of following him, assuming that he knows these woods better than us. And we're kind of trusting that he's not going to get us lost out here. But after about 10 minutes of running, we all slow down to regroup. And he just turns around red-faced and angry saying, which direction should we go? And I immediately go, what do you mean, dude? We're following you. And Chris goes, I was trying to follow her. I'm not sure which way we went. And this is where Sam loses it. And he puts Chris in his place by saying, listen, you need to get your stuff together. You cannot keep making emotional decisions like this. It's not just you out here. It's all of us. And at that same moment that I see logic entering Chris's face and eyes, I notice a little bit of movement behind him. But it wasn't directly behind him. It was deep into the trees, but it was something kind of white. And it looked as if it was almost swooping and gliding in the distance. It was definitely moving fast, but it wasn't running. It almost looked how you would imagine the Silver Surfer moves. But as quickly as I saw it, it just disappeared. But I didn't see it for long enough to feel like I could point it out to the guys. I just saw it for a moment. And Sam had already mentioned to me that people constantly see figures in this forest. So I didn't want to pile on to what was already happening. But by that time, Sam had already gotten Chris consoled. And they were both already starting to look around for footprints. And apparently when you're trying to track somebody and trying to find tracks, you have one person stand where you were standing before, facing in the same direction that you were standing before as well. And the other two scout the area full 360 degrees around the person that's supposed to be the pillar. And when they find tracks, they inspect the gaps in between the trees to see if there's any unnatural disturbances like plants stomped or flowers messed up or some moss kind of scraped off a rock. They just look for a disturbance in between these trees to get a gauge of what direction the people went. So they just have me stay put as the pillar while they're looking around for Maria's tracks. And I just keep seeing this thing, something white and off in the distance just gliding through these trees. But it doesn't really look like it's getting closer. It almost looks like it's searching for the right place to settle. And then just as quickly as I saw it, I lose it again. Because it's a little bit snowy out here. Then I just start trying to convince myself that I'm just seeing flurries of snow in the distance. And I just, I'm trying to convince myself that I'm not seeing real movement just to calm myself down a little. And finally, Sam announces that he found her tracks and they're just a little bit off to the left of where we were. I'm not super happy to hear this because 1, that means we're going to continue searching for her. And 2, that's in the same direction that I saw the movement. But I have to just follow along and we just continue hiking in the same direction as Maria's tracks. And we're not really talking much because this is a really uncomfortable situation and it's horribly cold out here. All I want to do is ask the guys if we could head back so I could pack my stuff and go home. But Chris seems absolutely determined to track down his grandfather's items. And Sam is just being a good friend and is just not about to let him do it alone. So we're just out here following these little tiny puny footsteps. We're just out here chasing little Maria around these woods. But there's no sign of her anywhere other than these tracks. And I'm just completely paranoid at this point after everything that has gone down so far. Like we don't even know if Austin and Kat got through that gate. We don't know if the guys at the cellar even found out that we locked them in yet. And we have no idea where Maria is or how she even got here in the first place, let alone why she's acting the way she's acting. And as I'm mulling over all of these questions in my head, Chris stops walking and just says, "Did you see that?" And I assume that he caught a glimpse of what I've been seeing in the distance. But when I look towards where he was looking, I don't see anything for a moment until I see a light glistening in the distance right over a little hill. And I know we all saw that one, but for some reason Sam and Chris immediately hide behind 2 trees. It's as if they're taking cover, and right then I realize what that glint is. It's the shine from a sniper scope. And these guys are both ex-military, and they're doing what you're supposed to do. But I'm just standing there in the middle of the map like a doofus, like it's my first time dropping into Warzone. And I'm clearly the liability on this trio. And right as I'm about to take cover with them, I hear what sounds like 2 bricks being slapped together. And I just feel an impact in the middle of my chest. It felt like a heavyweight boxer just planted his feet, sat down into a punch, and punched me in the chest full force. And this thing just decleated me and sent me right to my back. And I'm just laying there in shock for a second before I start feeling this fiery pain in my chest. And I'm trying to move, but I can't. So I'm just laying there motionless, looking down towards my feet, but I'm looking past my feet in the direction where the impact came from. Immediately, Sam starts army crawling towards me, while Chris is pointing his rifle in the direction of where that sound came from. Sam drags me behind the tree that he was hiding behind, and then they both come to my aid. And they're just feeling my chest and under my jacket looking for any wounds. I can't see anything on my chest, but I know there must be something with the pain that I'm feeling. And as they're tending to me, my eyes drift back upwards towards the trees, and I see that thing gliding again. But this time it's definitely coming towards us. But it's approaching us so weirdly. It's like it's hopping from left to right, just gliding across the natural slopes of the forest. And I don't know why, but I just can't take my eyes off this thing, even though my chest is hurting so bad. I know Sam and Chris are freaking out, trying to find my wound, and they're just yelling at me, slapping me in the face, trying to get me to answer, like trying to see if I'm okay. But I just can't stop looking at this thing approaching. And as it gets closer, I finally realize what this thing is. It's a man skiing with those long skis that they use for cross-country Olympic skiing. And he's just barreling right towards us. And he's just coming closer and closer, and he's closing in on us. And I finally get a good look at him. And he's covered head to toe with white camouflage, with a white knit mask over his face. And he's got a sniper holstered on his back. And this man's not even looking at me. He just seems to be in a rush to get wherever he's going. And my eyes just follow him as he glides right past us, until he's out of sight behind me. And it was like the second he was out of sight, my chest stopped burning and I got my movement back. And when I was able to sit up, the first thing I asked the guys is, who was that? And Sam just goes, dude, what are you talking about? Why'd you fall like that? Why'd you just collapse out of nowhere? And I reply super confused, like, what are you talking about? You guys are the ones that took cover. And Chris looks at me funny and goes, take cover? Take cover from what? And I put my hands up and I just say, hold on a sec. You guys are telling me that you didn't see that glare from the scope? You guys don't remember taking cover, and you guys don't remember seeing that guy ski past us? And both of them just shake their heads no, but they didn't do it obnoxiously. They did it in a way that I could tell that they believed what I was saying, but they were confirming to me that they did not see the same thing. And the only thing that I could come up with to say is, guys, I'm freaking out, I think I'm seeing things. And they both look at each other, and then they both look back at me, and then Sam says, don't worry, man, I've been seeing things too, but nothing that intense. And Chris just nods his head as if he's agreeing with Sam that he's also been seeing some things. But I guess they felt the same way as I did about bringing it up before. They must have not wanted to alarm anyone. And right as I'm about to start to beg them to go back to the house, the whole area lights up with a bright light, and we hear a clear shutter sound off to our right. We're blinded for a second, but we all know what it is. And when we look in that direction, we see Maria's back running away. Chris takes off running towards Maria, and Sam grabs me by my collar, and he just drags me to my feet to chase after him. I guess they were both just confident that I was okay, because they just expected me to get up and run, so I did. And I could see Sam and Chris's back as I'm trying to keep up with them. But I don't see Maria anymore. And I try to run slightly to the left to see if I could get a better look downfield to see if I could see her. But I don't see any sign of her. And eventually Chris comes to terms that he doesn't know where she is either. And he just skids to a stop. But he's just storming around this area, shouting for her to come out. And he's saying things like, I'm not messing around anymore, you better come out. You're on private property and I have the right to do what's necessary. Chris is clearly losing. I see that he's seething with rage and he's pretty much spitting while he's yelling. And he just keeps working himself up until he unloads his rifle into the air. And me and Sam both look at him like, dude, what are you doing? Because that's not why me and Sam are out here. But right after he fired his rifle, there was a deafening silence, followed by what sounded like a woman wailing for help. And for just a second, I actually thought to look up towards the trees around us to see if Maria was up there, to see if she caught the stray. But before I got the chance to look up, I started to hear more screaming from the other direction. But now I'm super confused, because if it was just one woman, it maybe could have been Maria, but now I clearly hear two. And almost immediately after the second one, I hear 3, 4, then 5. Just people screaming for help in every direction. And I look at the other guys to make sure that they're hearing this one too. And I'm not positive they are until the screaming builds up until it sounds like there's hundreds of people screaming for help around us. And both the guys start covering their ears, so I know they must be hearing it. There was a brief moment of relief knowing that I wasn't hallucinating, but it was shattered by the realization that these screams must be real. But as we're looking around, we don't see anybody, but it sounds like these screams are coming from all around us. It sounds like we're in the middle of a massacre and there's some type of horrible atrocities happening in these woods. And it's so loud that we can't even communicate with each other without yelling. So we just give each other a basic signal to head back. Finally, Chris has had enough of this search and we are able to head back to the house. But there's no way I could feel relieved at all because this screaming that's around us just won't stop. It's like all of the trees and all of the leaves are screaming at us in unison. And no matter where we go or how far we hike, it is just as horrific and loud and we can't escape it. And all three of us holster our rifles on our back just so we could cover our ears with both hands. And we're basically running back because none of us could bear being in the sound chamber for any longer than we need to. And it felt like an eternity trying to make our way back. It literally felt like my eyes were vibrating by the time we saw the house in the distance. It was like we were first row at a Screamo concert and the bass was rocking our eardrums. But this bass was real screams with real emotion. And the pain of the sound in your ears wasn't nearly as bad as the dreadful feeling you got hearing the pain and the sound of these voices. I literally feel like my eardrums are about to rupture as we're approaching the tree line near the house. And the moment I stepped into the clearing, I was absolutely shocked. It was as if I was a sprinter crossing the finish line. And the second my head entered the clearing, the sound completely stopped. And I just had a faint ringing in my ears from the newfound silence. And I look at the other guys to confirm that they're feeling the same way. And to make sure that I didn't just go deaf. And they have the same realization on their face, and for some reason my intrusive thoughts won. And I took a long step back into the tree line. And the second I did, it felt like I had entered a different room. And the screaming was back to being loud and deafening. But the second I stepped back out of it into the clearing, it was like the woods were soundproof. And the only thing I could say was, that's bizarre. And I'm just looking deep into the forest trying to figure out what we just experienced. But Sam replies to what I had said like 10 seconds later, while simultaneously tapping me on the shoulder to turn around. And he just says, it's not as bizarre as that, as he points to something behind me. And I whip my head around to see what he's pointing at, but at first, all I see is the house, and I don't really see anything wrong with it. But then I see what he was referring to, and he's talking about the cellar. The cellar doors were wide open, and there was clearly lights on down at the bottom, because there was a figure being illuminated at the top of the stairs. And at first I thought it was Maria because it definitely wasn't one of the men that we saw enter there earlier, because this person was way smaller, but I try to block out the light with my hand to get a better look at who this figure is. And I realize that it's a little girl holding a doll, and she looks sopping wet. And right as I'm about to confirm with the guys that they're seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, whoever was in the cellar reached out from the cellar and lifted this girl off her feet, and they all just dragged her down into the cellar. And we immediately start hearing those faint chants that we heard earlier, and instinctively we start beelining towards the cellar with our rifles out, because we just saw a little girl get dragged underground by 8 grown men. So I'm pretty sure it's rifle time. And as we're getting closer, I could start to make out the chants. I don't mean exactly what they're saying, but I could tell what language they're speaking. And they're clearly speaking French. As we got within 10 feet, the cellar door slammed shut, and we're just stuck outside of it with our ripping at the handles trying to rip it open. And we just hear some type of ritual chanting going on down below. And we're all just taking turns frantically ripping at these cellar doors. And we're just trying to break the hinges to try to free this girl that was just dragged down there. Sam is just holding on to this thing, pulling it as hard as he can until he just can't do it anymore. And obviously, eventually he has to take a break. And we're just standing there hearing the chants and the muffled screams of this little girl coming from right beneath us. And Sam is just trying and trying, but he just can't get it open. So eventually he waves over to me so I could give it a try. And I just grab onto the left door with both my hands, and Chris grabs onto the right door. And I just give this thing the hardest pull I've ever given anything. And super randomly, it just pops free from whatever was holding it closed. And I wasn't expecting it to release like that, so I go flying back from the momentum of it, and I land right on my back. And I just kind of scurry back up to my feet, and I look over and I see Sam pointing his rifle down into the cellar. And I'm just frantically trying to get my rifle off my back into my hands so I could follow Sam up. But by the time I'm on my feet and I have it adjusted into my hands, Sam just points his rifle at the ground and looks back at me, blank-faced. And I need to see what he's seeing, so I hustle up to him, still with my rifle drawn. But when I get a good look down the cellar, I'm dumbfounded. There's literally nobody down there, and it's completely quiet. And Chris still hasn't said anything yet, but we turn our attention towards him, because he definitely knows his cellar better than us. And Sam goes, "Bro, is there another exit?" And Chris just shakes his head really eerily and says, there's not even a lock on this one. To be honest, I don't even really know what was holding it shut. And Chris's cellar isn't modern by any means. It's literally a hole with stairs and just like wooden shelving and pillars in it so the dirt roof doesn't cave in. But literally the floors and the walls are dirt. And not to mention, he doesn't really even store anything down here. This place is more of a tornado room than it is a cellar. And we could see the entire cellar from where we're standing, but there is a little pile of who knows what in the back right corner. And Sam must have seen it first, so he just points it out to Chris. And then he just goes, yo, what's that stuff down there? Did you leave that down there? And at this point, we could tell that there's nobody down there and there's nobody around either. So we all just go down the stairs to inspect this pile of evidence. And when we get up to it, I can't really tell what I'm looking at first. It just seems like a miniature wooden lemonade stand. There's a couple things on its small shelf, and once we get up to it, and we finally get a flashlight on it, I could see that there's some sort of writing on the structure. They just look like weird random symbols scribbled all over the whole thing. And then on the shelf, there was some sort of garment that was just clearly burnt. And then there was some type of thin plastic that was melted as well. And then there was a pile of metal that looked like it was a big pair of scissors just broken into pieces and piled up. And then it all hits me at once. The garment that's burnt is Simo Haya's mask, and it's basically 90% ashes at this point. I could only tell it's the mask because there's a little white knit at the corner. And the melted plastic is the camera roll from inside the Nanking camera, and I could only tell because it's that brown liquid from those old camera films. But it's basically a puddle of goo at this point. And the bits and pieces in the pile of metal is the Lucitome just broken into bits. And I just involuntarily blurred out, what did she do here? And Chris is just shaking his head at the realization of what he's looking at. But I guess he knew more than I did because he replied, she was definitely performing some type of witchcraft. But I've never seen it quite like this. This is definitely different. And right as I'm mulling over the idea of there being multiple types of witchcraft going on in this general area, Sam reaches behind the small structure, which I guess was a shrine, and he just picks up what looks like to be an envelope. And on the front of the envelope, it just says in very feminine, dainty writing, Lo siento. And Sam just looks at me and just goes, should we give it a read? And I just reply, shrugging my shoulders, like, it's not like it could get any worse. So Sam peels the envelope open, and as he's pulling it out, he just unfolds the paper and goes, let's see what Maria has to say. And then he goes ahead and starts reading, and her English was pretty broken in the letter, but I'm gonna tell it to you in a very clear manner. The letter basically read, I'm sorry that you had to endure the repercussions of your grandfather's actions. Your grandfather considered himself a collector, but he had no regard for the damage that he would cause for collecting such sensitive items. I am a victim of your grandfather's ignorance. Your grandfather stole a doll from my grandfather. My grandfather made the fatal mistake of telling your grandfather that that doll was the first doll that he had ever hung up on the island that I grew up on. And with that information, your grandfather decided to steal the doll that protected my family from a malevolent spirit. And my grandfather spent his entire life trying to replace that doll, to please the spirit that was tormenting my family. He always just said, we just need to hang up one more. He always said that he thought that she would leave us alone if he just hung up one more. But it was never enough because the spirit wanted the original, and you had been hoarding the item that could have saved my family generations of pain. I had only come here to retrieve what was stolen from us. But when I saw just how much your grandfather stole, I knew that I had to free as many families as I could from whatever torment that they could potentially be going through because of these misplaced, stolen relics. Please do not attempt to come to my home to retrieve the property that was never yours. I apologize for going about it the way that I did. I was overcome with spite, and I could see now that what I was doing was wrong. And I hope that you could forgive me the same way that I've forgiven you, Maria. And we just walk out of that cellar, and the only thing that I'm thinking is that I just want to get off of this property. And I don't even have to say it because Chris says it first. He just says, get your guys' stuff together and I'll let you out the gate when you're ready. I promise, guys, we'll reschedule the hunt. Just let me know when you guys are free and can come back. I just give him a friendly nod, even though I know for sure that I am never coming back here. And to this day, I still have never been able to go on a hunt like I wanted to. So if anybody wants to take me, it is still a goal of mine. But don't you dare take me to Dudleytown. If you guys enjoyed this story, we have plenty more on the page. My content is made to binge. Watch every single video that I have on my channel. If you loved this one, you will love every single one of them. If you have yet to subscribe, please do so. If you don't want to miss an upload, please hit the notification bell. And of course, like and comment topics that you would like to see me cover. I love you guys. See you soon.